Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human, or should I say, ahoy there, my hearties. I have two of Britain's finest pirates with us, Sam Conniff and Alex Barker. Now, Sam's been a previous guest on the show, author of Be More Pirate, wonderful book. Really enjoyed that episode. But today, joining us is a new member of the crew, Alex, who is the co-author of the second book in the series, How to Be More Pirate. So Sam and Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Lovely to be back.
Thank you. So let's I think start with Alex and pick up the story of how you came to join the pirate crew and the genesis of this second book.
Yeah, of course. So I started working with Sam in January 2019. So getting on for 2 years now. And I was actually on a sabbatical from my previous job. I'd sort of, had one of many quarter-life, midlife-y crises where I had gotten really, really sort of burnt out and a bit fed up. Was actually thinking of changing direction altogether. And through a sort of series of coincidences, found Be More Pirate. I actually downloaded the first chapter onto my Kindle, along with, as I say in the book, like many, many chapters of first books. I was like, I need to find something to orientate me, but I don't know what it is. And I actually put it down, Be More Pirate, because I thought, I want something that's going to feel empowering, but it was too much about social change and changing the world. And I'd in my head gone, that doesn't work. Like nothing's changing anytime soon. So I didn't really get into it to begin with, and then picked it back up actually when I saw Sam advertise for a right-hand pirate, because at that point, actually, probably just circumstantially, I was starting to run out of money and was like, okay, what am I going to do? And I probably can't, rested a bit more, so I could think a bit more clearly. And a friend had forwarded it to me and said, this really looks up your street. And and as I read it through, I was like, wow, this would really help me to put my skills that I'd learned in my previous job into to good use, but do it in an entirely different way. Like I was really looking for something that was not establishment, that would give me autonomy and a level of self-direction. But fundamentally, I did sort of want to come back to this idea of social change or system change, and because that was really what I cared about fundamentally. And so I came back, interviewed with Sam. I think we clicked pretty quickly and kind of got on this adventure. And he just, we had a sort of good chat about what this all meant, and realised it really was going to be really open for me to understand and direct myself. He just had a really big folder of emails from people all over the world who'd said, this idea, this spirit of piracy is what we need, and I'm doing something about it personally. I've quit my job. I've started a rebellion in my company. What next? What do I do? Can I talk to other people? And that was the idea of forming a community around Be More Pirate, a network, and really for me to dig into the insights that people, find out what people were really doing, what aspects of the book they were actually applying. Because at this point, I was still quite skeptical. I was like, there are a lot of business books, there are a lot of, good theoretical ideas. So what's actually applicable? What's doable for people? And what is it about this piracy idea that makes people feel that they can? So that was, so that's sort of where I picked up from.
Right. And what did you see in Alex, Sam, as a right-hand pirate?
Alex, it was an excellent lineup of people. And there was an interesting observation, actually, by offering something that was really flexible. And I copied and pasted some of the job description into the new book so you can read it. But, I was interested to see how, with such talk about flexibility, people were willing to be flexible. So literally I said, there are no hours or fixed terms or anything whatsoever. It'll be entirely up to you as long as we meet these few criteria, one of which being we connect weekly, and the other being, we set out to change the world and nothing less. And what it meant was that I got an incredibly high caliber of very senior professionals, a large number of them women re-entering like the workplace possibly after maternity. So the kind of like level of experience, marketing directors of household brands, I wouldn't have thought of, who would have traded the salary of their past for the level of flexibility. So there was just an interesting observation about being very, very overt that there was autonomy and flexibility here. And I think in response to that, a lot of people were like, yep, great. And then where I'd gone in retrospect, and Alex showed me a bit wrong, was in this kind of changing the world, I'd put some criteria on it, which were reflective of the old world. I was like, well, we have to make it a global community. And everyone was like, yep, great, here's how we do that. And Alex sat there and said, why? If the point is to change the world, why are you inflicting this measurement of scale when you yourself, like, there's nothing worse than being quoted your own shit back at you, right? And when you yourself have said scale is the problem, why are you making scale the answer? And that was the sort of challenge that I was looking for, because another part of the brief was not to let me disappear up my own arse, like the world of becoming an author and the independence of it and the kind of travel and being on stage and all of that was a whole new world for me, which was filled with kind of fear, and it was fucking fantastic. And it's exactly that kind of scrutiny and that honesty and therein lies the spirit of true partnership. And that's kind of what I both knew I was looking for and didn't know I was looking for, and I found it there and then. And that kind of questioning and inquiry is maintained the same of us right up until this morning, and the email threads that we're on, continuing to challenge the best out of each other, and often having to apologize. I didn't mean that to be. And it's great. It's one of the few relationships that is consistently like that, and that is a spirit of piracy. Frank fearlessness and fairness.
Right. And Alex, to what extent do you feel you've prevented Sam from disappearing up his own ass?
Yeah, I think I have, but I don't really think that he runs that big a risk. Genuinely, to throw some compliments back. I know the difference between a real leader and not a real leader. I'd say that pretty much most of my experience of management to date had been egotistical, rigid, and Sam just exhibits entirely different qualities. And actually, it was quite confusing to me in many ways. And I suppose you must hear this a lot on your podcast, like the rub that you get when you are trying to change to a new way of doing or being. The paradigm shift that we need to experience comes with so much uncomfortability, because I couldn't at first understand how to orientate myself around our different ways of doing things, or what I'd been taught, how I'd been taught to do things. And also Sam's kind of intelligence was different to the kind of almost like institutional intelligence that I'd gotten used to, which is, I don't know, more formulaic somehow. And so I think, but I sort of learned to appreciate it differently. And I think we definitely have engendered a different and good way of working. And the biggest challenge is probably, and still is, where I need to be realistic, and Sam is always ambitious, and I want to be ambitious too, and I think we are, but we also need to just strike that balance all the time between really, embodying that big idea of be more pirate, whilst also being realistic about where we are as human beings on many levels. So, and I would say also on the scale point, I was that came from I literally come from a situation where, growing a network was the measure of success and the only measure. And it was almost the reason I left was it missed all the relationship that's so important in a network, where what you're really there to do is create connections with people. What else, And so, that was why I came in and said, I cannot do another kind of grower newsletter. That vanity metric of impact of our newsletter was was opened by 10,000 people, but you're not really having the connection with those people. It just was so frustrating.
That's interesting. I sometimes fall into that trap with this podcast, right? You focus on the numbers, and are you really changing people's lives? There's actually a story in the book about Mercedes vans, which talks to that point, right? Is that worth diving into, just to sort of illustrate that idea of connection versus scales, but in this case in marketing? Is that worth talking to?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they all do. And in a way, the story of us and the story of Alex does is kind of touched on there. And even you've admitted it. It is human to aspire to the quantifiable and outwardly recognizable measures of success, because we want to be seen as success by our peers, right? And the world generally likes a big number. And if we can hit big numbers, then the world likes us and we like ourselves, because the world likes, and we're so attuned to that. The other one is way more difficult. And in that moment, like that big folder of emails was partly there because I didn't feel I could live up to it. And I think we touched on this last time. Like, I really couldn't believe that people were taking these big life-changing decisions based on something I felt like I'd made up, but also because my life was in a period of turbulence where I'd slightly lost my own confidence of this stuff. And so I needed the verification and validation of someone who seemed much smarter than me, with that kind of academic and, the rigor. And this is, I think been a constant shift, and it's a constant shift of people who come to the material and decide to be pirate. And you see Alex, as you read the material, Alex writes the vast majority of the book, and this journey of becoming a pirate from someone who feels relatively institutionalized is the best thing. And we've said this, and it can sound a bit hackneyed, but the biggest rebellion anyone seems to make is the one against their own self-imposed limitations. And all those limitations come from these external measures. And this is what I need to look and feel like, and all the rest of it. And to challenge those. And for you to know that this podcast is about the lives that get changed and not the viewer reader numbers that you get, and all of us to avoid those kind of trappings. And the Mercedes one, yes, absolutely.
I think Alex was just going to come in there. Sorry.
Oh, go on, Alex. Sorry.
No, I was just going to go, but Mercedes, Sam. See you back.
Oh, no. I just, I know we're sort of diving straight into a story from the book.
It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I could answer the question, but that wasn't what I was thinking about. Just because we were there touching on the thing that I think is really difficult for lots of people. Yeah. And we see it in lots of people. Like, I quite like this, but I just don't think that's really me. And it's just because we were saying in the pre-chat before this, why is the podcast entitled what it is? And those moments of humanity, like freedom, being able to speak your mind, escaping from the vanity metrics, like those, I think, are moments when we really feel human. And there's a relationship between being pirate and being human, I think. Anyway, Mercedes, right? So there was this wonderful marketing director there who's undoubtedly a pirate. She's always been a pirate. And she saw me do a talk and she's like, we've got to get you involved. Mercedes-Benz vans is weirdly, for the brand as big as it is, they don't necessarily outspend their biggest rivals, the Fords and the Volkswagens, but they have this fantastic performing vehicle. And they've got these incredible values as a team. So once they explained to me who they really were and what they stood for, small business, I was like, yeah, this is great. I'd love to help. And what we discussed, we ran some big internal sessions. The whole team were ready to go pirate and rogue and really break out of the mold. And what ended up happening was, rather than continue to invest millions in outdoor and TV and compete against the others on the same field, this really brilliant bunch there, and namely a woman called Rebecca Barkley, who just so got behind this, they began to invest on a grassroots level behind communities of SMEs, like niche communities, like, people from specific BME backgrounds who otherwise, didn't get that kind of support, women's enterprise networks as well as national enterprise networks. So going in, investing in grassroots social enterprise and enterprise initiatives to listen to them and then try and give back something that was going to be useful to them. That's pretty hard for a brand that big to do, to really go down to a grassroots level. And they did. They invested in Impact Hub, Enterprise Nation, some pretty small, difficult things for them to engage, right? Not the usual things without a media agency and all the normal workings that a brand gets trapped into. And with a long-term belief in community, building a crew, all the stuff that you see in the book that's so important. And as a result, what happened was, as we hit pandemic and, vehicle sales obviously went through the floor, as did many businesses really falter. This business that had become quite pirate in its mindset, within a matter of weeks, was able to mobilize a scheme which was free loans. So vans that were sitting dormant on forecourts, free loans to businesses that had to close their doors, but could continue trading if they could move to a delivery model. And we saw so many interesting and innovative stories. But, we like candle and fragrance companies suddenly being able to deliver and then bringing like home goods and then bringing and then switching their business model because they could literally stay on the road. And at the same time, Mercedes were really pushing and leading on kind of e-vans and what they were going to do from an electronic and sustainable point of view. Just phenomenal. And they managed to get every dealership in the country behind them. So this sudden scheme was there for businesses, and you can't do that through a billboard, and you can't do that if you've been inauthentic in the lead up to it. So yeah, I'm really proud to have seen such effects and bravery really from a business which culturally is very much centrally controlled from a Dusseldorf outset, which has tight controls over its brand, which is what maintains the brand to be so successful. So to bend the rules in that environment takes a lot. And yeah, and to see that result, particularly in that difficult moment for so many businesses, also felt like a real pirate win.
That last bit is, doesn't make it into the book, but that was really the impact that was happening during COVID and lockdown. Seeing that shift in their mindset, it did really enable them to move quite quickly, and they knew what kind of impact they wanted to have really quickly. But I think the things that struck me about the Mercedes story, one of them being that this idea of proximity and why you get bad rules or norms and rules and norms across a business is because the people who are making those decisions are too far away from the source of information, let's say. And then that's touched on in lots of different management books and things anyway, but I've seen it across like all sectors, and what they were doing by going and spending time with entrepreneurs and small businesses and listening to them. You gain an entirely different set of insights than you can ever get from data, because it's person to person, and then you have this belief. You're like, I know what I am talking about, and that's what Nicola could then take into meetings with management. This sort of self-assurance and belief that I know this is what they need, and I am representing the customers, not just that you close the gap between this the need and the deliverer. So. And I guess that's just a general theme that I try to bring into all of our workshops and things, because we don't really make the effort to sort of go out of the office or go out of our out of our normal environments for understanding problems, when actually we should be going into communities, into care homes, or even just kind of random settings and like betting shops, I don't know, places where you just wouldn't go, and then you gain another kind of level of insight. I guess that's part of the pirate, like treading over, going off the edges of the map, going into unknown territory. It will bring you something quite different to your leadership.
And this joins the dots on those points, I suppose, because the first thing Rebecca, Nicola and I did after the first sessions we ran was we got in a van and went to customers who bought vans and like spoke to them on a rainy day in Wolverhampton and some other places in the middle of the country. And even though that seems pretty straightforward, the majority of brands are so caught up between the data, the spreadsheet, the media agency, the insight report, and all this kind of like stuff, which isn't without value. But when you separate instinct, professional judgment, who you are as a human being, and your ability to interact with, we sat there and the insights we got informed everything. So those simple reminders sometimes are the biggest thing, and how, Alex's hesitation at the beginning, nothing really changes. When you bring it back down to a human level, you realize where it does change, because if you can just work with human beings, when you get mass of shift of opinion of human beings, then that's when things do change.
Right. And so I'm interested, Alex, so you talked about, maybe being somewhat intimidated and, in your first couple of meetings, and you've also talked about this inner struggle to find your inner pirate. What have been the moments for you along the way in working with Sam, in terms of you finding yourself in discomfort, learning to try new things? How have you evolved over this process?
Yeah, I think that there's two things. There's just the ways of working in that. I sort of talk about it in the book a bit, that we started off, I guess Sam started off trying to officiate it a little bit, being like, we're going to have some, he's like, write an agenda for a meeting that we're going to have. But really all we ever did was just have a really long conversation, because when you're just two of you and it's so fluid, and you're trying to, you're really, and there was so much interest. So it was working out what was impactful, what was interesting, and what we wanted to focus, where we wanted to focus attention. We needed to understand each other, actually. And again, the relationship was so foundational. And I've realized over time that that's really all we're trying to do here is everything falls down for us when we don't communicate, I'd say. And so I guess for me also just all of my working life to date has been predicated on documentation and the production of a thing, because that's how most work is done. It's like, okay, you're going to lead on this project. I want to see something. And actually writing anything down for us was a bit of a hindrance, because I'd get really tangled up with, what does it sound like? Does it look right? And it wasn't necessary. Things were moving so quickly that we needed to let it go much quicker. So that was one thing. And I think that was just a really like a how, like that's why the book's called a how-to, because I'm interested in how, like, I needed to adjust that. The times when we had the most breakthroughs were just conversational. And that stays with me. Like, it stays with me more than anything I'd written down in a notepad. Like when we got to a level of excitement and momentum about what we were doing, then we knew we would follow it through. And then the other thing is a leadership thing, because, I'd come from being in an organization where I don't think that there was never real development for you there's not a lot of development for you as a person. You were more of a function, and I didn't know what it was like to be developed as a human in that way. I know that sounds really sad, and I'm sort of hesitant to say it out loud like that, but Sam pushed me, made me stand up in front of audiences, like, from the get-go. I mean, I think I had a willingness to as well. I wouldn't have, he didn't force me. But as soon as there was appetite, and he put so much trust in me, and I'd not experienced trust from someone in a leadership position. I couldn't really understand it. I was like, what? What's going on? And so for me, it's been a real journey in that sense. And also as soon as you start talking about principles like being a pirate, there is an impetus to live them. I couldn't really go out there authentically talk about this stuff if I wasn't trying to live it. And that's a practice. It's something you have to continually sort of do on a week-to-week basis. And I don't always get that right, but I'm increasingly aware of it. And there are different elements to that. I think Sam often talks about fun and joy, and that being such a key thing we have to hold on to and remember. So did that answer the question? I think.
Yeah, but I'm interested. So being a pirate. So what do you? Yeah, because other people listening to this might try to getting their head around. Well, how do I be? Obviously there's a lot in both books, but just to relate to others. Like, what have you found hardest about being a pirate or following this code? You've already talked about letting go of documentation and just have it be about the conversations. Is there anything else that you've found you've had to let go
of? Perfectionism, I'd say. My entire conditioning of school and university, I had to reconcile the idea that doing important things in the world might mean not getting everything right all the time. And I feel that I've been, valued and judged throughout all of my education and institutional experience on that. And then having to switch and suddenly be like, no, I sit now at the kind of helm of a huge network and community of people who my responsibility is to connect with them and to keep connections and keep the idea and the spirit of Be More Pirate alive, because I know how much it means to them, and I know how important and empowering it is for them on a day-to-day basis when they're really fighting kind of live battles and things at work. So if I think I said, and I'm like, God, like the bigger picture is big. Like, look at where the world is, and it hasn't got better since I started this journey. It's so, I suppose that's what we talked about with the inner rebellion. It's like I I'm constantly pushing back against a certain level of conditioning that I've had, which gets tested all the time. But every time you break through, it's really good.
Right. Could you think of a moment recently where you felt that breakthrough?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's what I was just saying now was like, yeah, finding, that there are typos and things and just that, parts that I know I could have done better. And feeling like I want to just, my first instinct is like, I just want to give up. I just want to go. If I can't do it perfectly, I can't, I'm not doing it. And what kind of attitude, what kind of leadership is that? That's not what I'd advise anyone else. It's definitely not what we need. In fact, this sort of brushing under the carpet of mistakes or oversights and things that you see in government it would be infinitely better if there was an ability to own them and be more human about it, and just look for support to your network for how to get it better to get it right next time. So yeah, I think I can more easily reorientate myself now back to a bigger picture, because there's so much more freedom in this Be More Pirate than there ever was in an organization where really your value is predicated on that, that annual appraisal. Like, do I pass that? Do I not pass it? Do I get that promotion or not? And rather than the bigger things that are going on, whether that's I could cite lots of things, but to do with environmental issues, democracy, leadership, all of these sort of bigger things that you just hear whinged about all the time. So
yeah
and
what I'm hearing, as you said, share, is something about vulnerability.
Of course.
Yeah no, I really hear that. And go on, sorry, are you going to say?
No, that obviously somewhat comes from Brené Brown, but I think it emerges organically. It was but also I think, in terms of like how to, which is the focus of the book, is I just used to get so used to hearing words like, oh, we need transparency, oh, we need trust, and blah blah blah. But I was like, but how do you get there? Like, because I'm not seeing any practices that are being put in place that support people to do those things. And so I want to know how. And vulnerability is what leads to trust. And so therefore you need interventions and practices that allow people to be a bit more vulnerable, and have more trust. And I listened to one of your other episodes with Amy Edmondson. Obviously about, we talk about in pirate terms about safe spaces that are also brave spaces. So you've got to be able to air your opinions and things. But I think I find the frustration with that, and no disrespect to her, because she's incredible and it's great work. But when you have a Harvard professor talking to you about being human and being braver, it's literally being talked down to from the top of the pyramid. And so I'm more interested in how
I should have told her that.
No, I mean, no, like I think she's totally right, but it's just for I'm talking about, I don't want to say ordinary people because that's patronizing, but just a person working in a job, because that's all I hear back, when I'm talking to people in our network. Like, they're like, it's hard, you talk about, create a safe and brave space to just say what you think. you've got to think of the interventions that will allow for that, and it's so that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. Okay. And I suppose that Sam's has somewhat created that space for you. I'm right on the ship. So for people listening to that and maybe interested, what are some of the interventions that you've seen work that allow for braver, safer spaces in organizations?
I would say so. I put this into the crew context, the idea of getting together a group of 5 to 8 people, maybe. I mean, it's dependent, but let's say that that's a good number for a small group to meet, to start being pirate, to create that. But the critical things that I observe are to make them informal. So don't try to make it like part of a meeting, or in some way make it informal. So signal to people that this is going to be like a space, a different kind of space, whether you call it a fuck shit up meeting or whether you just decide to meet out of hours in the cafe. Maybe make it an inspiring space. Like I take a lot from Priya Parker on that, like how you gather matters. So don't neglect, don't think you can shoehorn it into like the end of like the usual team meeting, because that sometimes happens. They're like, oh, we'll just make this a particular session, and
now it's time for fuck shit up.
Yeah, and people are like, well, not really, because this is our scheduled. You've got to find some way to shape it differently. Using it as a place to practice. So that's something that's really important, because people always say, when we talk about small bold actions and breaking a stupid rule, people will always say, okay, we're going to challenge. I'm going to ask some difficult questions. I'm going to challenge more. We're going to be more challenging, like 100%. And then, you get into it, and that's hard, and people don't know how to do it, what to say. When really, I'd say, I'm going to really generalize and say as a nation, but we're not really good at articulating, I think, especially on the spot. I think that's one of the hardest things you can do, is to stand up in a meeting and say your beliefs to somebody who's more senior than you. So you have to practice how that sounds and get a sounding board from your little crew, and they can say, like, you're going in a bit too hard there. I think it will be received like this, versus, that wasn't strong enough. Or even if it's like an email that you want to send, you share it with people. So I think that space for really practicing, don't underestimate it. I think that's important. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what are the other kind of, I think also kind of inviting in the resistance, like bringing it to be a focus, rather than pushing it away. So like going, okay, what will be the things that are likely to be the challenging points. If you're saying you're trying to, I don't know, launch a mutiny about something, even bringing someone in who's on the opposite side and saying, can you come in and just say to us, like, what is it here that you're going to object to so much? And then you can really thrash out, and you get so much better insights, rather than just forming a group that is, largely agrees with each other. But there's a lot, I guess there's a huge range from the smallest things you can do to having much bigger ambitions.
Yeah, but that makes sense to me, that just sort of wishfully hoping to create safer spaces within the existing structures, may be naive, and actually, as you say, create separate space, at least to begin with, to practice. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I really love all this new kind of self-management talk and stuff, but I just think that most organizations are not in that space yet. At least from Sam and mine's experience. Sam, contradict me if you think that's untrue, but most of the time people are coming from still quite an old command and control type of structure, where there is so much fear, and it's not like, oh, okay, we'll just embrace this new progressive radical way of working straight away. I've mostly observed it to be, we're really going to have to start with some small interventions.
Yeah, but I think the thirst for your material and just how popular the books have been suggests to me, that there is this huge appetite, this pent up appetite, almost in individuals. It's just, how do I create the system around me that allows me?
I think
to
in
be
that we tapped into a zeitgeist and a feeling, and the difference has been the level of honesty, and you can kind of see that. You asking, Alex is, the biggest kind of turnaround in her, and I think there's a real truth that work is a pretense more often than not, and we have to try to show up looking like we know what we're doing. And that's been the case, as Alex said, like from school. This is kind of this thing we're socialized into, and the norm, and the truth of work is it's not where we're supposed to go to be human. There's no one listening to this call, or if this podcast, if there is, I'll be surprised, whose organization isn't based on the principles of scientific management, which suggests the system is more important than the human. And no one has updated that philosophy since Taylor instigated it. Nobody. And so we know the truth of life, the real experience of life, is making it up as best as you can. And so there's an incongruence. And during these sessions, I started referring to it as the kind of conformity creativity like paradox, because most organizations, 20th century, the number one skill of the 21st century was going to be creativity. It was widely agreed by work foundations and trusts around the world. And very few organizations don't herald it as one of the things they aspire to. Yet I've never been yet in an organization that doesn't reward conformity above creativity. Like, definitely go and take all the risks, fail everywhere. But if you want to succeed, do what you're told. And, and so this is an obvious lie. And it's the kind of lie that children grow up with, their parents want them to be a certain way, but step out of line and I'll act a certain way. So, what the fuck? And then suddenly you get to the point where you can tell the truth. And I think that's the big kind of difference in Alex is, rather than we'd leave a session and we'd be talking about what was the truth, Alex now will tell the truth in a meeting. And that's the next paradigm of leadership, being able to strongly, firmly, fairly, but frankly, tell the fucking truth. And at the moment, in most meetings, that makes you a complete weirdo. It's like, what? Hold on. Because it's so against the etiquette very often. And yet actually you end up being the hero and everyone's thanking you because that was the information that we needed to know. And that ability in itself, asking difficult questions, is kind of piracy 101. And then if you can land it in a way which unlocks the truth in others and unlocks others' abilities to do so. And like Alex says, sometimes it needs a bit of preparation and training and work with your crew, but ultimately that's often the end goal. Changes everything. Feels small and is huge. I didn't swear.
Just as you're swearing there, Sam, there's a point in the book where you talk about like the bad language.
Oh yeah,
fucking something. And I thought that was quite profound. You contrasted the general corporate speak with real talk or bad language and the importance of that. And
yeah,
it's part of the spell breaking, isn't it, of this idea that we're all get rewarded to conform, and that's the way to go.
Yeah. The language thing, yeah. It's odd because it's one of those weird things where that the science backs up the idea that not speaking in jargon is going to get more things done because you can actually communicate more. I mean, this is my background was communications. I suppose I've always been really interested in that, and that's I guess another part of being more pirate that just fascinates me. The idea of the story is the framework that enables people to really do stuff. But yeah, the of course, if you speak in really complicated sentences, people will lose the sense of what you're really saying. And the thing that gets me is the vagaries of like, what are we really getting at here? And yet it is just everywhere. Especially, I mean, guess the background that I'd come from, which was think tanks and charities, where you're talking you're talking about how to change, and then on the flip side that you're confusing people. And I just wanted to take a stand against that, and I have done for a really long time. And in fact, I should have broken more rules around it when I was when I had the chance, I suppose, but didn't. And now I just tell other people to do it. But this idea of cognitive overload, is I see it all the time, even now. Still.
What, from the jargon? You mean cognitive overload from the jargon?
Yeah. Not even. I don't mean technical jargon. I don't mean like where you've got a legal jargon per se, which is maybe necessary. I mean, when you just use lots of long. I think in the book I say things like catalyzing and leveraging and the quote was like the systematization of everything and okay, fundamentally most taking aside the kind of people who are interested in management books and business books, which is a really small proportion of people, and that's key compared to the general workforce. what do we even think is a system? Okay, because we just talk about these things like it's a given, and it's not. And that's you need to break it down, I often find, and really dig into what do we mean by those words before we even start to get to a point of figuring out what we're going to change. So yeah, and I think the example in the book that's given is from a human rights charity that was finding that using vague language was really obstructive to human rights, because it actually, vague language is weak, and it enables you to be less firm about human rights issues, and feel like they're less important than they are. And we don't prescribe swearing as the antidote, but sometimes it is more effective, and can be a way to grab people's attention.
And I think we
sort of
know
shake
that,
them out of that complacency.
A lot of work speak is deliberately designed to dehumanize things. We wouldn't make the decisions that we do that have a negative impact on the world around us if we talked about it in terms of our lives and our homes and our children and the things that we actually did. But because we create these proxies, then there's all sorts of walls in between them, and we can just refer to the fucking data and like whatever else it is. The terminology distances us as human beings, as we've done so with many other of the means of production. If we actually had shit on our hands of the decisions that we had to deal with, or the outputs of our work, or the real lives of others, we'd make vastly different decisions. And it's difficult because we're human beings, and so we communicate through patterns, and we need necessary shorthands. And there's hundreds of useful words that we'd be able to say to each other now, which would forge the kind of connections that we want to get to. But the ones within work are what we've begun to term as rules, and those, through the process of this, they're the rules that really need challenging. Sorry, did I swear again?
No. I was just thinking of one example that I was talking about to somebody this morning, social prescribing, as a way for explaining that there are social there are social reasons why a person might be unwell, and therefore there are social solutions to why a person, I'm sure you know this already, Richard, but that term, social prescribing, you wouldn't know what it meant if you just saw it. Whereas, it's I suppose quite a human premise. And yet you found a really
hands up everybody
way
who's sat in a meeting where someone's used some absolute nonsense jargon and not felt able to ask, what are you talking about? When with your what phrase? And there we are. And suddenly you're locked into this system of, let's not call it lies, but certainly near pretense that we then, inadvertently continue to prop up. And then we show up pretending that we know what we're doing. It's a house of cards.
Yeah. The other thing it links to, and I had somebody, you talked about self-managing organizations, Alex, but we had a recent guest who's a big proponent of those, and talks about one of the differences in those organizations is people show up with their whole bodies, and this idea of embodiment. And I think if you start to speak from your body, almost like from your heart, from your gut, and from your head, you're not going to necessarily use those words. And sometimes you might come out with a swear word, but you're going to tend to come out with, if you're grounded, you're going to come up with more grounded language. So I think there's something about that as well, right? It's, that style of language keeps us up here.
Absolutely. And that's the shift, isn't it? Are you showing up so that other people think you're smart? Or are you showing up because what you're going to do will actually make a difference? I definitely have been guilty of I want people to think I'm smart, and to hell with what happens next after this meeting, frankly. So, and that is a shift. The idea of the whole, bringing your whole self into work. It's Lalou, isn't it, really? Talking about, but then I always feel that, yes, I 100% agree. And it will always come back down to, what are the interventions that will allow us to really, really do that? We talk about it, we agree that it's a good thing, but then we don't really make the effort to make those things, true. And it's all the small things like we talked about just then. Like you can restructure your meetings to change power dynamics, really paying attention to that sort of thing. All the little things that go on every day and the bigger things. I think
these are
this
is exactly where it begins. This notion, because what we're talking about here, is intellectualized answers to very human problems. And we can over intellect, like I like to say that, the danger of smart people is making things more complicated.
Yeah.
And being able to say, I don't know what to do is really only the most truthful answer there is. But that's not acceptable. So then you make stuff up, fudge it in between. And then all of a sudden we're basing this on someone who thinks they know what they're talking about. They want to do that. And that's really dangerous because, Alex's notion earlier on, when she said it in her past life, feeling like nothing changes. If you look at the big changes of history, it is when public opinion changes it. Like the large scale, if you want to look at like singular policy issues like drink driving or mass movements like civil rights, they're never led by government, never ever. Like I can't think of one. Sometimes there's a senior politician, sometimes there's an influential person, but it's only when public opinion hits a certain tipping point that then those other institutions have to give sway. And they might not give all the sway that's necessary, as we're still fighting on many of those fights anyway. So that notion of human beings going on a journey, the language of it is essential. You have to believe in it, to trust yourself that this is something that, I am on board with this, because that groundswell of public opinion then always starts, and it's the cliche of the small groups is the thing that changes the world, but it damn well is. And it's upon that small group to be able to communicate its ideas in ways that others can trust, believe in, understand, comprehend, and continue to share. And we'll see that, over the coming years. Will public opinion hit a tipping point around something like climate? I would say probably, but it will take something even more horrible than has already happened to some people for that tipping point to take place. And then all of a sudden, we'll get to that place. It's not going to be because we're led there. It's going to be because ideas like this and conversations like this reach a certain tenor and probably tenacity.
Yeah.
Change is always human.
And it starts with
change is always human.
Those
it's
crews,
never systemic. The system will always protect itself and
puke
more process all over itself, and that forces its inability to change.
Absolutely. And that's again the frustration with I don't know, I guess organizations that are trying to talk about change, even if we just talk about charities, even they sort of protect the status quo in a way. And so you end up with leading and talking about change from a point of not the human point, but from the factual perspective. You'll present with a list of data, and not to say that that's not invaluable. You want to have the data to back it up, but if you're really there to move people and to change public opinion, or even let's just say your team opinion, what have you got to lead with? And I rarely have seen examples where people will say, okay, I'm going to lead with the story that will move people enough to believe in something different. And that's what I think Be More Pirate does. The power of presenting a totally different spin on these historical pirates and them as social revolutionaries and not villains is so eye-opening, because it shows how the establishment covered up truth, and I think that really is feels quite shocking to people. But yeah, I think it is the small groups, but it's also the framing and the story, and how that's presented. Yeah.
And the other thing you talk about, we've touched on it a little bit in the podcast, and I know we're getting to the end of our time, but which I really liked and resonated with this idea of rule breaking, because that seemed really pragmatic, right? As you say, you can talk about systems and cultures and all the rest of it, but a lot of it boils down to the rules that I have to abide by, right? And if I start with identifying a rule that I'm prepared to break, or maybe my crew collectively is going to commit to break, that's one way of dealing with a big amorphous thing that is the system that can start to change the world. I liked that as a as
Alex
a
took
pragmatic place
the
to
idea
start.
of, I started saying it in some of the sessions
Yeah.
after being part about professional rule breaking, which takes that idea that it's the thing we've got to do. And Alex kind of sums up the journey that we've been on for me. She took this kind of like slightly raw idea of something I'd observed. And I now quote Alex when she says that professional rule breaking has moved from being the risky thing that it seems to do to being the only responsible lever of change left.
Right.
Yeah, just because it was mainly from the idea that I didn't think that any of the usual levers of change that I was seeing, things like, you sign a petition, I don't know, give to a charity to stop a problem. What else? You can protest something. Like, none of those things had really changed anything large scale that I could see. Charities will put plasters on things. They will alleviate what the system is generating. A petition, rare, like look at the big things like the Brexit petition. I mean, not that that's necessarily the right way to go. I'm not going to say that, but even think about the protest for the Iraq war. That was the biggest protest we ever had, and we still went to war. So I was like, well, where is the lever of change? Where is it? Somewhere there is something, and I feel that you've got to be close to the problem, and so it's the people inside an organization who are sitting on the lever, pretty much. They've got to be the ones to go, no, like, I'm not doing that. And obviously there's a big spectrum on which you can do it. And that's the thing, that also in the way that I was seeing, having come from the charity sector, that when you're trying to, you're solving a problem over there by giving money, there's such a disconnect between you and the thing, really. You're like, okay, I'm just going to kind of alleviate my guilt, and I'm not really involved with it. Whereas when you're in with the work, you get the feeling and the empowerment of like, I am that change, like I am it. And so I think that flip side of the fear of it is so good when you do it. That's why it's powerful.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I know we're at time, so thank you so much for sharing your stories from the latest book, How to Be More Pirate. We'll put links to the books in the descriptions below, and how people can sign up to the movement. For anybody out there, both of the books are great. The second book, especially if you just want sort of practical clues on where to start, ideas on where to start, it's fantastic. If you want to create your own rebel insurrection inside your companies, then do look to these.
Thank you,
books
Richard.
for
Thank you everyone
inspiration.
for listening.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Alex. Wonderful
very much.
conversation. Thank
Cheers.
you. Ta-ta. Bye-bye.